Hello, well, welcome to our webinar. So congratulations on getting in. I hope you've managed to get the technology going. We're just waiting for Simon to join us and for it to click on to 12 o'clock, and then we'll get going. So thanks very much indeed for joining us. At the moment, we've got 17 people as part of our webinar today, the first of our series of Foxtrot webinars this week. So we'll just wait until 12 o'clock before we get going, which will allow everyone else to join us. And then we'll meet up with Simon and ask him some questions. Of course, there will be some opportunity for you to ask him questions as well during this webinar. So far, we've got 18 people that have joined us. We've got plenty of Foxtrot members involved: Charlie Proctor, Claire Ratcliffe, we've got Emma Buse, we've got Gordon Bendel, Jessica Buckle, John Castley, Liz Law, Phil King, happy birthday Phil the other day, Richard King, Rodney Hayward, Shay Moody Smith, we've got Susan Smith and Tony Bird, so plenty of people getting involved. So I'm hoping that Simon might be able to hear us.
Can you hear me?
Hi, Simon.
Yes. Can you see me? I don't know if you can see me. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can see you. Yes. Can you see me?
Yes, got you well. Yeah. Thanks very much.
Great. Turn up my volume a bit.
Yeah.
Brilliant. That seems to work very well.
Yeah, I've been doing a bit on Zoom actually. The Sporting Life website have a weekly quiz just to keep us entertained, and that's done on Zoom, and it works incredibly well.
Brilliant. Well, that's great. Well, maybe we'll have to get involved in that as well. But thanks so much for joining us. We'll wait a couple of minutes just until 12 o'clock before sort of kicking off. But in the meantime, just those people that have joined us, just to explain how it's going to work. So at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see two options. So one is a Q&A box, so you can click on that and type in any question that you want. The other thing that you'll see is a raise your hand option, and that will mean you can click on that and we can actually come to you and you can ask a question verbally direct to Simon. So we've got two ways for you to send in questions. Now, just to be absolutely clear, we can't, neither Simon nor I can see you. So whether or not you're in the bath, whether or not you're in your jacuzzi, still in your pajamas, it doesn't matter. No one can see you. So your cameras are all turned off and you are muted. So whatever you're up to is entirely your own business. But we can come to you and unmute you so that you can ask a question if you want during this webinar, which is going to last about 30 minutes here with Simon. Now, one other thing just before we get going is this is obviously a webinar week for Foxtrot members, and we're trying to hopefully keep everyone involved with racing during this difficult time. But what we're going to do is in each webinar, as you'll see behind me, I'm visiting a different race course, and you have to try and guess which race course it is. And at the end of the webinar, I'll be letting you know. So have a look at the race course behind me throughout the week and have a guess at which race course we might be at. I suspect Simon's probably already got a good idea.
I was just going to say, can I enter?
Only if you give the answer at the end. You can't give it away just yet.
All right.
So the number of people joining us is going up pretty rapidly as people sign up. So we'll just wait for another minute or so, I think, before we get going. We've got 40 people so far that are watching us, which is great. Lots of people from lots of different Foxtrot syndicates all involved. So really great to have everyone involved here. So just a reminder for those people that have just joined, if you want to ask any questions, we'll go through those towards the end of the webinar and either type them in at the bottom or click to raise your hand and we'll come to you and ask you to ask your question live. Okay, well, it's past 12 o'clock, so it's time, shall we get going? And if I can sort of start off with just by asking you the first question, obviously we're all staying safe at home. What have you been up to? You know, you, family, all safe and well?
Well, I mean, every day is obviously very repetitive at the moment, Dan, as I'm sure it is for everybody. There's a great limit on what you can do. We have a dog that we walk, which is good. But thank goodness for the weather. I don't know what it's been like in the north, but down here in soft Surrey, the weather has been extremely nice. And so there's been plenty of time to get out in the garden and actually even do a bit of sunbathing. But I realise a lot of people are not so lucky, people that live in flats and just can't get out. So it's a very difficult time for everybody.
So can I just ask you about sort of your background, I suppose, and how you got into racing? Were you always a sports enthusiast? How did you get to this point? And what was sort of your upbringing in terms of when you were younger?
Well, it's an absolute mystery, Dan, because I can remember watching early Grand Nationals. I can remember watching Specify win, I think in 71 or 72 it was. And there's no real interest in horse racing in my family. I have an aunt who lives in Spain who likes horses, but that's about it. And I think the famous 1973 Grand National, where Red Rum wore down Crisp, was the race that really got me hooked. And I still think it's one of the greatest races I've ever seen. So I was really getting into racing at an early age. And I think Red Rum was the horse that really sealed my interest. And so it's been a dream come true, really, to make a long-term career out of what would have been a hobby. I was very lucky leaving school. There was a publishing company in my hometown of Shoreham by Sea, which produced a weekly form supplement and also an annual form book, and they were called Super Form, and the book was called The Hague Races and Racehorses Annual. And I was there for 2 years. It was a great grounding in journalism, in handicap ratings, time figures. And then eventually, when the Racing Post was launched, it doubled the number of jobs in journalism. And I was able to get a job on the Sporting Life. And then a couple of years after that, got into commentating when SIS started broadcasting live pictures for the first time into betting shops. And they wanted to improve the quality of commentary. And I did a demo tape and I got taken on. So, I had a few right time, right place moments.
So how did the commentating come about? Obviously, that was your enthusiasm for racing. How on earth do you get involved in commentary?
Well, as I said, it wasn't on my horizon at all. I did a point-to-point when I was reasonably young, very nervous indeed. Don't think I did it very well. And then I got a job into journalism. I thought I was just destined to remain a journalist. Very luckily on the Sporting Life, which I'd read all through my youth. And then this opportunity came up with the pictures in the betting shops, and I was encouraged to do a demo tape by one of the guys I knew at SIS. And I went to Plumpton one day and tried to do this demo tape. And it's not like now where we have all these wonderful little smartphones and you can just record on. I had this huge clunky tape recorder, which I endeavored to trap between my pullover and my coat and hold it there while trying to hold a pair of binoculars as well to do this demo tape. And being very shy, I went out into the middle of the racecourse to try and do it, but it was way too windy and it was the wind was buffeting the sound on the tape recorder. So I had to go into the stand in amongst the punters and do the commentary and with them looking around at me most disagreeably. But anyway, it went okay, and I got taken on. And in the first few days I did on course was under the mentor of another commentator. So my first ever race I did live on a race course was a 5 furlong 2-year-old seller at Folkestone. You can't start any lower than that.
Well, you certainly worked your way up the ladder from that point. And particular memory I think I've got is you working for Channel 4 Racing, and the impression I think I take of that was it looked great fun, a great team of people, and must have some great memories from that time.
I do. I mean, that was the big break, really. Obviously, it was the main terrestrial broadcaster, or at least they had more programs than the BBC did when I started. And these were people I was working with, people I've been watching for years. You know, the likes of John McCurrick and Jim McGraw and Derek Thompson and etc. John Frankham, and they were very welcome. And I think it was a testament to the man management skills of the boss, the producer, Andrew Franklin, how he was able to get all these disparate characters together to produce an informative but also entertaining program. And I think there was equal, importance placed on both. And if we had an argument on air between us, all the better. It made good television. And of course, there were big arguments, certainly between McCurrick and McGraw and Frankham and Tomo. And so, it did swing along quite well. And when I started, I was just really a results reader, replacing an older guy called John Tyrrell. And then I was really taken on to be a bit of a spare commentator, working in the old ditch commentary box down the course at Newmarket on Cambridgeshire and Cesarewitch days, unglamorous start. And gradually got asked to do more and began to present a bit on the morning line. And eventually in 2000, when Graham Good stepped down from the main commentary job, I became the main commentator.
So just a reminder to everyone, I know we've had a few people join us a little bit late. So if you've got any questions for Simon, you can do that by filling in the Q&A, which is at the bottom of your screen, or you can click the raise your hand option, and that will allow you to be unmuted and to ask a question directly at Simon. So if you've got any questions, and we'll be coming on to people's questions shortly, then please do fill out those boxes at the bottom of your screen. Simon, you mentioned there about a lot of fun and rivalry and things, and it sounds like within Channel 4 there's lots of different opinions and things. Were they real, or were they very much for the camera? I mean, did people really have such a range of opinions and views, or do you think it was more so actually that was just what we're trying to do in front of the television camera?
No, the opinions that they held were sincerely meant. Occasionally, I think one of us, perhaps on the morning programme, sometimes to wind up McCurrick, would act as an agent provocateur, just to stir things up a bit, but also maybe to put the other side of an argument. And it was very easy to wind up Mac and also Jim McGraw. He could get very red-faced and angry at times. So we did have a lot of fun, but the opinions were strongly held. McCurrick and McGraw certainly had very different opinions on things, but Mac really was a bit of a performing artist. He said he was a pantomime act. It was a very carefully crafted persona that he developed on air, but at root he was still an excellent journalist. Nobody prepared more thoroughly for each program. He had a lot of idiosyncrasies in his preparation, but he was a really professional broadcaster. And I was always asked, the question I was asked more than any other question when I was at the races is, what's he really like? Because he was such a love-hate figure with the viewers. And I always said that he was actually a lot nicer than you might imagine. He was a very good guy, and he was quite a kind person. But there are other aspects, of course, of his personality which weren't quite so palatable.
So I'm just moving away from racing for a second. Just tell us what other commentary you've done. Have you done anything on other sports or any other experiences away from racing?
The only time that I really gone off in a different direction was at the 2010 Commonwealth Games. There was a shortage of commentators, broadcasters, because there was a big terrorist threat in New Delhi. And I'd always wanted to go to India, and I thought, well, it would make a nice change, and it fitted in quite well with the racing schedule that year. So I was given the bowls tournament to commentate on, and there were 4 commentators on the bowls. And obviously I knew nothing about bowls, and actually I thought it was quite a boring game, frankly, and I was a bit disappointed that I was given the bowls. But I did the research, and we went out there, and it turned out that the bowls was a full 10-day tournament and was the toughest gig of all, because they had 4 matches on 2 rinks every day, and some of those matches could last between 2 and 3 hours. And the conditions at the stadium were pretty basic. We were basically living in a bit of an army. We were surrounded by army, really, guards. There were no spectators at all. It was just players and the media, and it was fiercely hot. And it proved to be a very demanding 10-day gig, and we had a lot of difficulty getting through it. And we were originally planned to have 2 commentators on each match, but after 3 days we were so exhausted, such long days, that we agreed that we've got to do matches on our own. And I remember having to call a ladies singles match which lasted 3 hours. So I don't know how and I had the worst commentary position as well. One was just in the tiny makeshift stand in the shade, and the other one was on a wobbly table outside under a parasol, and got very hot indeed in the afternoons. So I was stuck there for 3 hours. It was character building stuff, Dan.
Fantastic. Well, we've had a few questions in specifically about your commentary, so maybe we'll come on to those now. And one from David Wilson asked, so can you just tell us a little bit about how you prepare for a race, and how do you memorize all the colours?
Well, memorizing the colours is really what I do for a living, in a way. So it's a bit like anybody's job, it becomes second nature. I'm not saying that it's getting any easier as I get older, and it's much harder if the race is a moderate race. I find the colours much easier to learn, obviously, if the horses are well known, and also because I care a lot more about what's going to happen. When you go to Southwell or Redcar, with all due respect to those fine venues, I don't tend to care quite so much what happens. So learning the colours, I'm still learning them okay. I can still remember them well, providing you can see them okay. And I'm just praying at my age now that I can retain that memory and identification skills for a few more years.
You mentioned there about being able to see them well, and I imagine there's a few instances of fog and mist and so on, which has caused some problems. Are there any race courses that you particularly sort of, wouldn't say dread going to, but maybe you have to scale some vertical ladder to get into the commentary box, or somewhere that you think, oh God, I'm not so keen on going there because it's always windy, the commentary box is rattling. Is there anywhere that you might pick out and say, it's always a challenge to commentate from? Yeah,
there are some courses. I think Redcar is a tough commentary because it has a long straight course, and there's often on sunny days a real shimmer which falls over the track, and that can be really tricky. It's not a very nice commentary box. It's sort of in the loft of the stands, and God forbid if a fire ever broke out, could be, you could be in big trouble. The Newmarket July course used to be a horrendous climb up 2 vertical ladders to the commentary box, one longer than the other, and the second one was pretty much outside with just a couple of iron rings round the ladder, and you're sort of hauling up your bag and your bins, but that has changed now, thank goodness. I used to dread that because it was a horrible climb, and now they've actually put a staircase in. And the Grand National course used to be quite difficult as well. On the embankment, there was just one very long ladder up to the commentary position, and unfortunately one commentator was due to work, I won't say who it was, one commentator was due to work there, and he just couldn't get up the ladder. He froze. It was so high and so steep. But thankfully, racecourse, I think one good thing, I suppose, with all these health and safety regulations now, the access to the commentary boxes has improved. I mean, some courses, you say, are very prone to bad weather conditions. Some of my more local courses like Brighton and Goodwood, often there's usually a sea fret at 1 or 2 meetings a season. But I think it was really a meeting at Goodwood where there was a very heavy sea fret one day during the glorious Goodwood meeting back in the early 90s, which might have got me the job on Channel 4 because I had to just improvise that day, and the visibility was down to about 100 yards at some stages, and it was necessary then to try and just keep the crowd entertained. And I do think that it is part of the job that foremost we are there to provide an accurate description of the race, but there is always an element of performance involved as well.
And a question that we've had from several people, so Phil King's asked it, John Castley's and a few other, which is harder to commentate on? Is it that 20 runner handicap, or maybe a field of three in a novice chase where everything's all happening a bit slowly. Which is the hardest race for you to commentate on?
The hardest races, I think, are probably the low-grade handicaps or maidens on straight courses. Commentating on a straight course is much harder than on a round course. And this is where in Australia and America, they have very good commentators, but they're very seldom faced with calling horses over on a course like Newmarket, for example. And the Cambridgeshire is one of the big tests of the year because it's a massive field, over 30 runners. The Cesarewitch isn't much easier. In fact, I actually think the Cesarewitch can be worse because 2 weeks after the Cambridgeshire, the sun is that bit lower in the sky and you can be staring into the sun. So they're two races that I seem to get allocated very often. Somebody's obviously got it in for me and is still intent on testing me, but they really are tough races. And I once had to call a race called the Redcar 2-Year-Old Trophy down the tubes live on Channel 4. It was the only race we were showing from Redcar that day, and I was given the choice by the boss whether I would go up to Redcar, and he'd have to pay obviously for a sound man and other facilities. And we said, oh no, I'll wing it, we'll do it. Well, the sun was so bright that day at Redcar that you could hardly pick out any of the colours at all. And it was the most frightening thing I think I've ever done in broadcasting. And I just literally grabbed the name of the winner out in the last few seconds. Never again.
I'm sure you'll remember those instances, but we've had a number of questions from people asking whether or not there's any finishes that you particularly enjoyed and particularly remember as a bit of a highlight.
I was a massive fan of Courto Star. I mean, for me, he's the chaser of my career, next to Red Rum, probably of my lifetime. And when he came back to win at Haydock in 2011, I think it was, wasn't it? November 2011. And many people had written him off at the end of the previous season because he pulled up at Punchestown on his final start, despite having run really well in the Gold Cup behind Long Run and Denman. And he turned up at Haydock to run in the Betfair Chase, which he's already won before, of course, up against Long Run again. And he was so unexpected because I think Long Run was nearly odds on, and Courto Star, this marvellous horse that had won 4 King Georges and 2 Gold Cups, was 6-1. He was 6-1 to win that Betfair Chase. And of course, what happened was, I think anybody that was there will never forget it, or anybody that watched on television, because the atmosphere was just incredible. And jumping the last, I suppose my emotions get the better of me sometimes. And it was just fantastic. I think it was the best day's racing that Haydock has ever staged, or the most memorable. And of course, there is a Courto Star statue there now at the back of the grandstand. That was one of them. And another really memorable day was the day when Frankel ran in the Juddmonte International at York, stepping up to 1.25 miles. And he made 2 really good Group 1 horses, St Nicholas Abbey and Far, look like selling places. And I thought that was an amazing performance. And again, I think it was York's finest day. Among the crowd that day were people that you wouldn't normally have expected to go racing. I saw Henry Daly, a jumps trainer, who I'd never seen at a flat meeting. And I saw him in the car park and he said, I wouldn't miss this one. And so such was Frankel's allure at the time. Those 2 days really stand out, but there have been many. I've been very, very lucky.
So we've also had a few questions away from the commentary side of things, and Bruce and Leslie Stevens and David Wilson would like to know whether or not you've been involved in ownership at all.
Yes, to my great cost I have, and obviously this is a pertinent subject. This is a syndicate. Yes, I've had a lot of experience. I've had a lot of shares in horses, sometimes whole horses. I could go on for hours. I don't think you want me to go on for hours about the various ups and downs I've had. I remember, for example, buying a horse at Ascot Sales out of Sir Michael Stout's yard, thinking, arrogantly, oh, we can improve this, you know. And it was almost bred to win a derby. It was right by the derby win a reference point, and I thought might make a bit of a hurdler. It's called Analog, and I sent it to a friend of mine, Philip Mitchell, who trained in Epsom, and we arranged for Richard Dunwoody to come down and school it one day, and it seemed to go very well. You know, I thought, oh, he jumped all right, and we went up to Richard at the end of the gallop, and I said, oh, that looks all right, Richard, and he said, oh no, he didn't give me much of a feel. So that wasn't a very, very optimistic start. Anyway, we ran him a couple of times, and it was dreadful. He ran at Southwell on the flat, and he was dead lazy. And I managed to get AP McCoy to ride him at Folkestone in a novice hurdle on his, I think, his third start over hurdles. And I think the close-up comment in the paper says ridden fourth. And AP never stopped pushing and shoving, as he used to do, all the way to finish a very remote fourth in that novice hurdle. And that was the best performance of Analog's career. And unfortunately, I owned 100% of him. So it cost me dear. He eventually, we managed to pass him on. He went to another trainer and he pulled up in his last 4 starts. He just wasn't a racehorse. And I've had a few like that. And I've had 1 or 2 winners as well. I had a horse called Slip Sliding Away, which I part bred. And he won 4 races at Goodwood for us and again at Ascot. But it's very hard to make money out of ownership unless a horse is of a certain standard and can race for enough prize money. And I think on the flat, in my experience, you really need a horse that's rated 90 and above to have any hope of getting a return through prize money. Though there is always the resale value. That's the great thing about British thoroughbreds, that there is a strong market for them to go abroad at the end of the season, end of year horses and training sales. So although the prize money, it takes a lot to make money on prize money. If you're lucky, then you can possibly sell at a profit.
So Liz Law has asked a question. The photographs behind you, have they got any significance?
Oh yes, I have. Yeah, well, this, you know, the one at the top there is a horse called J.O. Time, who I claimed out of a claiming hurdle at Worcester. The story was, I used to work with Kerry Lee, whose father Richard Lee was a trainer for a long time. And Kerry was worked on Channel 4 Racing behind the scenes, and then she got her chance to take the license. Richard stood down, so she became a trainer. And in a very weak moment, I promised to support Kerry, and which I regretted almost immediately, thinking I don't really need to be owning another racehorse. But anyway, I'd seen this little horse, J.O. Time, running in a novice chase. He was running mostly over hurdles, but he ran once or twice over fence. So I noticed at Bangor one day that he jumped very well. And I thought, well, maybe there might be a bit of a future over jumps in him, even though he was very small. And he gave Kerry her first winner as a trainer. We went to Uttoxeter her first time, and he won there. And he won a couple of times also that season over jumps and was placed very consistent, lovely, genuine horse, had a fantastic jump in him. And particularly one day at Ludlow, I remember he absolutely flew the final fence. It was one of the best jumps I've ever seen a horse. And I wasn't in it 100%. I had a part owner, and her family were very keen to run him at the Cheltenham Festival. I didn't really think he was going to be good enough, but he'd got a rating high enough to get into the novices handicap chase at the festival. And in fairness to the little horse, he ran really well. And but for being really badly hampered at the second last, I think he'd have finished 6th or 7th. So we had a lot of fun out of him. So that was J.O. Time. And below him, that Slip Sliding Away, the horse I mentioned earlier in the winner's enclosure at Goodwood. And that's him just to the right there, just show to the right, and those are my often doomed colours in the yellow with the red armlets. But with him, at least they did manage to win. But he was the first horse that really won races for me. I'd lost, you know, I'd had a lot of shares before then, and now I've gone on and I'm breeding, and I'm finding that actually quite satisfying.
So can you tell us a little bit about the breeding that you're doing and what involvement you have with the breeding side of things?
I was involved in a few broodmares in Ireland with an old friend of mine, Ronnie Began, who used to be a jump jockey, very good jump jockey. He rode several winners at the Cheltenham Festival, and he has a farm in Ireland. And we were trying to breed, in hindsight, not very sensibly, from cheap mares. We had a couple of horses. Slipsliding Away was one of them. Another horse called Son de Silence, who won both here in England and in France. But generally, it was pretty disastrous. And I thought I've had enough of breeding. It's hard enough being an owner and trying to make it pay, but being a breeder, I can assure anyone that's not been involved, is really difficult. You need a lot of luck, a lot of things to go your way, and the costs keep on coming. And then I got a call from one day from a lady called Gina Rerick, who is the only American trainer in France. And I didn't know who she was at all, but she rang up and she said she'd been given my name as somebody who was interested in breeding. And she had a filly that she wanted to find a home for and possibly find a breeder that she thought she would make a broodmare. And I said, well, I wasn't really interested, but I might know someone that would take her. I spoke to this other person. They said yes. And then 24 hours later, after I told Gina that I found somebody, they said no. So I felt rather embarrassed, and I decided to go for it. Always been a bit of a gambler, and went for it. And although she hasn't got a great deal of pedigree, she is by Oasis Dream, who's a very good broodmare sire. And that was the attractive part of her. And I went to see her in France, handed over the money. And I thought she was a lovely mare, lovely bay mare, beautiful temperament. And we've just had our 6th foal from the mare just last week, a lovely filly foal by Recoletos, who was a very good miler in France. And so far, she's been a fantastic breeder. The first 2 foals have both won races. And in France, the big difference is that you get the breeders' premiums, which can be up to about 20% of the prize money. And so it's not going badly. I'm not saying that we're making money at the moment, but it's been an enormous pleasure. Obviously, it's a long way to go to see the progeny run and go and see them on the farm. But it is my great hobby at the moment, this broodmare in France. And she's on a lovely small little farm in Normandy, not far from Deauville, just beautiful part of the world. And I just love going over there and seeing her and standing in the field, trying not to get kicked by foals and yearlings.
That sounds fantastic. And of course, Gina is someone that we know in Foxtrot. She used to be a Foxtrot trainer for us over in France. We have a lot of fun with her. And we've probably got her to thank for putting the 2 of us into contact with each other. So good to have a very good mutual friend. Gina's certainly very knowledgeable and doing some very good things over in France.
I think she's a really good trainer. She's a little bit underestimated, actually, Dan, because I think particularly with older horses, she's very good at freshening older horses up. And she doesn't really have much of a record with 2-year-olds, but I don't think she's ever really been given that sort of horse. I think she does very well with the ammunition she's got, and her and Tim are really great people. She's very forthright, and she's got strong opinions. But I like that, and she's come and joined me in the commentary box several times over here in England when she's been visiting the sales in Newmarket, and she came up at Royal Ascot last year. So I've got to know her very well and like her very much.
And you just mentioned there that you're a bit of a gambler. Michael Keating, who's joined us from Ireland, would like to know whether or not you like to have a bet on the races.
Yes, I do. I think it's important really to back up your own judgment. I do tips on the Sporting Life website. They're free tips. Nobody would pay for them. But I do feel it's incumbent on me to sort of back up my own judgment. I'm not saying I have fortunes on. Sometimes I'm more confident some Saturdays than others. I had a great year last year, not being too boastful. I really did have a good year, but there haven't always been good years. So obviously, I think most people would say they have runs of wins and then they have long losing runs. It's very changeable. But I slightly changed my way of looking at races and put a bit more emphasis on value, and it certainly worked last year. Obviously this year it's early days, but I'm in profit for them this year as well. And then it all stopped. It ended at, I had 2 out of 2 winners at Uttoxeter after the Cheltenham Festival. And I think that's the last tipping I've done for them, because of all this crisis ever since.
Well, Simon, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. I'm sorry we've not managed to get through all the questions that we've received, but it's certainly been very popular, and it's been, you know, fantastic to hear from you. And I'm so glad to hear that you're staying safe at home, and hopefully it won't be too long before we hear you back on the racecourse.
Yeah, let's hope so. You're welcome.
Thanks very much indeed to Simon Holt for joining us on our first webinar of our webinar week. Don't forget you can join us tomorrow, where we've got Richard Farhar, who's going to be talking about his walk between every race course in Britain and his work with racing welfare. So lots of things going on this week. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. I hope the technology has all worked for everyone. It's been certainly new to me, but hopefully we've got off to a good start today, and I look forward to seeing everyone later in the week with our webinar week. Thank you very much.